You're listening to Actors with Issues with Juanialo, a podcast of actors, by actors, and for actors. Today's guest is actor, producer, and entrepreneur Alan Ceppos. So, Alan, you have been in this business since you were a child. And I'm curious, did you always imagine from that young age that you wanted to pursue acting at a career level, or did other things pique your interest along the way?
So I always had the priority of I wanted to do acting,
Mm.
but I think my number one thing I found recently, a little note I wrote to myself at 10, saying my number one priority was acting, my number two was traveling, and my number three was speaking French. And it
Mhm.
turns out those three things I've actually done a lot
Yeah.
of. So yeah, so I knew really right from the beginning.
And you've also had a successful career producing a number of Broadway productions. So how did all of that start for you?
Well, since I've always been interested, I grew up in New York. My grandmother started taking me to Broadway shows when I was 7.
Mm.
So I've seen probably almost every single musical comedy that's been on Broadway since the late 50s. And I met some people 10, 15 years ago who were involved with producing. And I thought, I've I've seen everything. Maybe I should invest a little bit in some of the productions. So I've done that. It's not as fulfilling for me as actual acting or other things I do in my life. It's interesting, it's intriguing, but it's not as exciting as I thought it would be, the producing part of the industry.
And I've heard from in a number of interviews. I listen to a lot of podcasts where they do interviews with actors, and I believe it was Kerry Washington spoke about how producing for film and television is very different from doing so for theater. How in theater it's much more on the financial side, you're an investor, versus film and television, you're often more involved in the development process and the creative process. Have you given any thought to doing more producing on the television on the on-screen side?
So I was in a web series that I helped produce, which in fact, that's true. I was very involved with the production and the writing and the development. And of course, I was in it
Mm.
as well. So that was much more fulfilling. But I think, in life, you kind of stick to what you know and do best. And I think I've decided the producing is left for someone else. Unless it's something that I see a lot of actors, they will produce, they'll do vanity projects themselves, they'll produce it so they can be in it. I would consider doing that.
And with the many sort of uncertainties in artistic careers, there are all these peaks and valleys, and times where we're booking, other times where we're not. And I'm curious, was there ever a time that you thought, okay, I gave this a try, maybe this is it for me, or did you always know that you just had to keep going and make it work?
So I was lucky because at a very early age, I decided that acting wasn't going to be how I was going to support myself.
Mm.
So I've always been able to jump in and out when I wanted because I have two sides of my life. So the other side of my life has always allowed me to continue to act, but yet support myself. So there was never a moment when I said I would jump out. There were a lot of moments when I said I should be in it more.
And,
And now in my life where I am at this point is my other business we have retail stores in New York City, and I have such a great staff that I'm really at a point in my life now where I don't really have to do that part of my business. And so I am plunging a lot more in my acting.
and with the name of our show being Actors with Issues, as we've spoke about already, sort of different career obstacles and hurdles that our guests face. I'm curious, because you've been involved in the industry for so long, what have you noticed has been the biggest change in the industry and sort of what it means to be an actor over the years?
So I think the biggest change I've seen in this industry, which is the biggest change I've seen in my other life as well, is when you had an 8 o'clock, I mean, it sounds like a small change, but it means a lot more than just that individual idea. When
Mm,
you had an 8 o'clock call, if you got there at 8, you were late.
right.
Now there's not the same sense of time or responsibility. I noticed that people get there's not the same punctuality.
Mm.
And I think because people have a cell phone, they can always call to say I'm late. It's not big change, but it's significant because it takes away responsibility from individual people.
Many of my sort of day jobs, I've worked as a manager at a gym and at a few other sort of businesses over the years, and also have kind of noticed that, I always grew up like, if your shift starts at 9 o'clock, you're supposed to be like ready to work, not walking in at nine.
Sure.
Oh, I gotta go put down my bag. I gotta charge my phone. Gotta clock in. I gotta do all these things. And yeah, I feel like it's sort of an age old adage of, if you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time.
Yeah, I was just at a film festival in Paris. One of my films was showing, and the whole team, they were under 35, and the fest like 8 o'clock, that's when their big gala event was to begin. And I was the only one there at a quarter of, and all of these others, they got there, 15, 20, 30 minutes late, and it seemed all right. No one
Mm,
walked in and said, I'm sorry. And I see that in my other business as well.
mm,
I don't know what that's from, but it's definitely a societal shift, I think.
yeah. And when it comes to misconceptions, there's so much misinformation out there, lots of sort of acting gurus and things like that. Young actors can fall for a lot because, folks look impressive and they have a resume and a website. There's just so much out
Mhm.
there that can sort of confuse and misguide young actors. So I'm curious, are there any misconceptions about the industry you think that a young actor might have, that you've maybe debunked over your career?
I think the old adage, if you work hard, you will succeed. And I think most young actors that I meet, I think they all realize that there's a lot of work in the industry. I don't think it's, I don't, I think that's one thing that's been pretty consistent is you don't suc- you don't succeed overnight in this industry. Basically, it's very rare.
Right.
And I think people going into the business know that. So I don't think I can answer your question and say, yes, this is, an impression that I'm going to debunk that, people thought this way. I think I think it's a pretty clear and honest industry about that.
Mm.
Young people know what they're getting into. I think so.
And one of the projects that you were recently in, and I believe also upcoming, you're returning. Is it Gravesend that you were mentioning before
Gravesend,
that you helped produce as well?
yeah, I did not produce that one.
No, not that
No.
one. Okay, this is a separate one. But with Gravesend, folks can watch that now on Prime Video. They can stream it now. So what can you tell us about the show and your experience working on the series?
So it's a show that deals with a crime family in Brooklyn. The neighborhood is Gravesend.
Mhm.
It's a neighborhood in Brooklyn. So it deals with a crime family in Brooklyn in the 80s. I think after The Sopranos, people love that kind of content.
Mhm.
So the first season was on Amazon Prime, and there was a huge, huge following. So huge that they went into production for the second season, and there are a lot of major names involved with it. Fran Drescher is in it, Armand
Mhm.
Assante is in it, Andrew Dice Clay is in it. Um, there's there's a it's getting a huge, and so they took the first season off for a couple of weeks off of Amazon Prime to get ready for the new season, which is going to start, I think, the July 4th weekend. They'll
Mhm.
put the first season on again, as well as the new episodes of the second season. And it's intriguing, it's kind of gritty. It's pretty exciting to do, and I think it's going to be pretty successful.
And you mentioned before that one of the notes that you left for yourself was involved speaking French, and as you mentioned, you are fluent, and your character is French as well. So, what can you tell us a bit about your character in the show?
So, um, because the crime family wants to expand their world, they go to Miami
Mhm.
and they want to get involved with businesses in Miami. And I am a restaurant owner in Miami a French restaurant, a French person with a French restaurant
Mhm.
in in Miami, and they want to get involved in my business. Things don't go necessarily the way they would like it to, nor the way I would like it to, but it will continue as they go down the season.
And quickly before we go, one question we'd love to ask all of our guests is, in 10 words or less, what advice would you leave for a young actor?
The tritest thing you hear, I'm going to preface it, then I'll give you 10 words or less.
Sure.
When you watch the award shows like the Tonys the other night, or you watch the Oscars, and the person that won gets up and says, follow your dream, work hard, you can make it. You sit there and think, this is so trite. But that's all I could think of now to respond. Just follow your dream and work at it. It's true. It's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. There's a very good friend of mine who's probably watching, and they have noticed that that's sort of a recurring message at the end of the show when we do ask that question is, believe in yourself, follow your dreams, keep going, and while that's it's not necessarily like tangible advice, like, okay, I believe in myself right now, but there's always a moment where you fall off and where you get deterred and you feel those things, but it's so important to keep that in your mind.
We only have one life, and it doesn't last very long. And so if you don't follow what you really want to do in your heart, what's the point? At the end, when you're lying on your deathbed, and you should have no regrets, because as far as I know, you're not coming back. You can't again. So you really just need to follow what you want to do and what makes you happy. And if you're lucky, the thing that's wonderful about this industry, I think, is most people I meet do it because they love doing it. And not not everyone is that lucky. A lot of people are working at jobs that they're doing it because they have to. And so if you're lucky enough to be in this industry because you love it, that's all we can ask for.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and for
Okay.
talking with us about the issues. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Actors with Issues on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit our YouTube channel for full video interviews. Actors with Issues is executive produced and hosted by Hawani Allah. See you next time.